Hey guys, tonight we begin with a story that will make you grateful for every mundane marriage problem you've ever had. Picture this. You're a young woman in medieval Europe, maybe 16 or 17 years old, and your father has just arranged your marriage to the local executioner. Not a blacksmith, not a merchant, not even a lowly farmer, an executioner. The man whose job it is to end lives for a living. You think modern dating is complicated? Try explaining to your children why daddy comes home covered in blood and why the neighbors cross the street when they see your family coming. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up on your wedding morning in medieval Germany, around 1450. The church bells are ringing, but not for joy. They're tolling for a man who'll be executed later today by your soon-to-be husband. The irony isn't lost on anyone, least of all you. Your wedding dress, if you can call it that, is a simple brown wool garment that your mother has desperately tried to brighten with a few wildflowers. There's no white silk, no elaborate ceremony, no celebration feast that will last for days. The local priest will perform the ceremony quickly, quietly, almost apologetically, because even the church struggles with the moral complexity of your husband's profession. Your father, a struggling tradesman, arranged this marriage not out of cruelty, but out of desperation. The executioner's position comes with a guaranteed income, a house provided by the town council, and most importantly, security. In a world where starvation is a constant threat, and plague can wipe out entire families in weeks, marrying an executioner isn't the worst fate that could befall you. But as you stand there in your modest wedding dress, feeling the weight of every villager's stare, you begin to understand that security comes with a price that money can't measure. The ceremony itself is a somber affair. Your husband-to-be, let's call him Heinrich, stands beside you wearing his best clothes, which are still noticeably darker than what other men wear to their weddings. He's not a monster, not the sadistic brute that popular culture might lead you to imagine. He's actually rather gentle, speaking softly to you, trying to offer what comfort he can. But his hands, the hands that will soon hold yours as you exchange vows, are the same hands that tightened nooses and swung axes just yesterday. The same hands that will do so again tomorrow. The few guests present speak in whispers, and you notice how they maintain a careful distance, as if your new profession might be contagious. Your mother weeps quietly, not from joy, but from a grief she can't quite name. She's losing her daughter not just to marriage, but to a life that exists on the very margins of medieval society. After the brief ceremony, there's no celebration, no dancing, no feast. The other townspeople disperse quickly, eager to return to their normal lives and forget about the uncomfortable necessity they've just witnessed. As Heinrich leads you to what will now be your new home, you pass by the town square where the execution scaffold stands like a permanent reminder of your new reality. The wooden structure is stained dark with decades of use, and you notice how the townspeople instinctively avoid walking too close to it. This scaffold will become as familiar to you as your kitchen hearth, and infinitely more significant to your daily life than you could possibly imagine on this wedding day. Your new home sits slightly apart from the other houses, just close enough to the town center to be accessible when Heinrich's services are needed, but far enough away that the other residents don't have to think about what happens inside those walls. It's larger than the cramped quarters you share with your family, but the extra space feels less like luxury and more like isolation. The windows are small and high, and you realize that this house was designed not for comfort, but for discretion. Heinrich shows you around with obvious pride. He's worked hard to make this place as welcoming as possible, but you can't shake the feeling that you've entered a prison with particularly well-furnished cells. The kitchen is where you'll spend most of your time, and it's equipped with everything a medieval housewife could want. A large hearth, sturdy tables, plenty of storage. But even here, reminders of Heinrich's profession are inescapable. The knives are kept exceptionally sharp, not just for cooking, but because Heinrich's professional reputation depends on maintaining his tools in perfect condition. The herbs hanging from the rafters include not just cooking spices, but medicinal plants that Heinrich uses to treat the wounds and injuries that sometimes occur during his work. Nothing in this kitchen is purely domestic. Everything serves the dual purpose of maintaining both a household and an execution practice. As your first day as an executioner's wife draws to a close, Heinrich sits beside you near the fire and tries to explain what your new life will be like. He speaks carefully, gently, but honestly about the challenges you'll face together. The isolation, the whispered conversations that stop when you enter a room, the way children will be taught to fear and avoid your family. He doesn't sugarcoat the reality, but he also promises that he'll do everything in his power to make your life as normal and happy as possible. As you sit there listening to the crackling fire and feeling the weight of your new wedding ring, you begin to understand that love in the executioner's house will have to be strong enough to survive in the shadows, because the light of normal society will never quite reach your door. The weight of blood money. You've been married to Heinrich for 3 months now, and you're beginning to understand that being an executioner's wife isn't just about social isolation. It's about living with the practical, day-to-day reality of death as a family business. This morning, like every morning, you wake up knowing that your household income depends entirely on how many people the local authorities decide need to die. It's a grotesque economic equation that no other medieval wife has to calculate. More executions mean better meals, new clothes, perhaps even small luxuries. Fewer executions mean tighter budgets and harder times. The town council pays Heinrich a base salary, but the real money comes from the fees charged for each execution. A simple hanging might earn him the equivalent of what a skilled craftsman makes in 2 weeks. A more complex execution, burning at the stake, drawing and quartering, brings in significantly more. You find yourself in the bizarre position of hoping, for purely economic reasons, that the local crime rate remains steady. Not high enough to suggest societal breakdown, but not so low that Heinrich's services become unnecessary. It's a moral calculus that keeps you awake at night, staring at the ceiling and wondering what kind of person you're becoming. Managing the household finances requires a delicate balance that other medieval wives never have to consider. When Heinrich receives payment for an execution, you can't simply rush to the market and spend freely. Appearing too prosperous immediately after a public execution would be grotesquely inappropriate and would fuel the already widespread resentment toward your family. Instead, you have to space out your purchases, buying better cuts of meat weeks after the execution that paid for them, acquiring new household items gradually and discreetly. You become an expert at delayed gratification not by choice, but by social necessity. The money itself carries its own psychological burden. Each coin that Heinrich brings home represents a human life that is ended. When you use that money to buy bread, cloth, or firewood, you're acutely aware that your comfort has been purchased with someone else's final breath. Other medieval wives might worry about the moral implications of their husband's profession, whether he's honest in his trade, fair in his dealings, charitable to those in need. You worry about whether it's morally acceptable to enjoy a better meal bought with execution fees, or whether wearing a dress purchased with blood money makes you complicit in the taking of life. The practical aspects of managing Heinrich's professional income create additional complications. Unlike other tradesmen who can predict their earnings based on seasonal demands or market conditions, Heinrich's income is entirely unpredictable. A quiet month with no executions means careful rationing of resources and dipping into whatever savings you've managed to accumulate. A busy month with multiple executions brings in substantial income, but also increases the social tension and hostility directed toward your family. You learn to save aggressively during the profitable periods, never knowing when the next execution will occur or when political changes might affect Heinrich's employment. The town council expects Heinrich to maintain certain professional standards, and many of these expectations fall on you to manage. His clothes must be kept clean and in good repair, not because anyone cares about his appearance, but because a professional executioner reflects the authority and competence of the local government. His tools must be maintained in perfect condition, and since metalwork is expensive, this means regular investments in sharpening, repairs, and occasional replacements. The execution site itself must be kept in proper order, and while Heinrich handles the major maintenance, you're responsible for the smaller details, ensuring there are adequate supplies of rope, maintaining the wooden structures, keeping detailed records of expenses and income. You discover that Heinrich's profession comes with hidden costs that other medieval families never face. The social isolation means you can't participate in the informal economy that other women rely on. The networks of borrowing and lending, sharing resources, trading favors and services. When other wives need help with childcare, cooking for large gatherings, or assistance during illness, they can count on their neighbors. When you need help, you have to hire it or do without. This isolation isn't just emotionally difficult. It's economically costly and makes every aspect of household management more expensive and complicated. The seasonal nature of executions adds another layer of complexity to your financial planning. Winter executions are rare because travel is difficult and crowds are smaller, which means the dramatic impact that authorities seek is diminished. Spring and summer bring more executions as courts convene and traveling justices make their rounds. You learn to anticipate these patterns, saving money during the busy seasons to carry you through the quieter winter months. But you also learn that unusual events, political upheavals, religious conflicts, or outbreaks of crime can completely disrupt these patterns, making long-term financial planning nearly impossible. Perhaps most disturbing of all is how quickly you adapt to this economic reality. Within months of your marriage, you find yourself automatically calculating the potential earnings from different types of executions, budgeting based on Heinrich's professional calendar, and feeling a complex mixture of relief and guilt when a profitable execution is scheduled. You realize you're developing the same practical, business-like attitude toward death that Heinrich has cultivated out of professional necessity. The transformation disturbs you, but it's also essential for psychological survival. You can't afford to view each execution as a human tragedy if you want to maintain your sanity while managing a household that depends entirely on those tragedies for its economic foundation. The stench of stigma 6 months into your marriage. You've learned that the smell of death doesn't just cling to Heinrich's clothes. It permeates every aspect of your social existence. You wake up each morning knowing that today, like every day, you'll navigate a world where people literally hold their breath when you pass by. Not because you actually smell of death, but because in the medieval mind, the executioner's family carries an invisible contamination that threatens to corrupt anyone who comes too close. You've become a walking reminder of mortality in a society that desperately wants to pretend death only happens to other people. The market square becomes your daily battleground against social prejudice. You need to buy food, cloth, household supplies, the same necessities that every other medieval wife requires. But your shopping experience is unlike anyone else's. Merchants serve you last, even when you arrive first. They handle your money with obvious reluctance, often insisting you place coins on the counter rather than handing them directly. Some vendors refuse to sell to you entirely, claiming they're out of stock of items that they've just sold to the customer ahead of you in line. You learn to shop early in the morning or late in the evening when fewer people are around to witness the awkward transactions. The social geography of your medieval town has been redrawn around your family's presence. You notice how conversations stop when you approach, how groups of women disperse when you try to join them at the well or the church steps. Children are taught to avoid you, not because you've ever harmed anyone, but because their parents believe that associating with the executioner's family might somehow mark their own children as tainted or unlucky. You watch from your window as neighborhood children play together, knowing that your future children will never be invited to join those games. Religious life presents its own unique challenges. The church has a complex relationship with execution. It's considered a necessary evil, sanctioned by divine authority, but morally problematic nonetheless. You attend Mass regularly, sitting in the back of the church where your presence won't disturb other worshippers. The priest acknowledges your family's role in maintaining civil order, but he also makes it clear that Heinrich's profession places him in a morally ambiguous position that requires constant prayer and penance. You find yourself praying not just for forgiveness for your husband's work, but for strength to endure the daily humiliations that come with being associated with that work. The superstitions surrounding Heinrich's profession create additional social barriers that you never anticipated. Many people believe that executioners possess supernatural powers, the ability to curse their enemies, to predict death, to communicate with the spirits of the condemned. Others believe that touching an executioner or his family members can bring bad luck, illness, or even death. These beliefs mean that you're not just socially isolated, you're actively feared. People cross themselves when they see you, throw salt over their shoulders after you've passed, and whisper protective prayers under their breath. You discover that medieval society has developed an entire vocabulary of euphemisms to avoid, speaking directly about Heinrich's profession. He's referred to as the master, the craftsman, or simply that man. You become his woman or the craftsman's wife, as if using your actual names might somehow invoke the power of death itself. This linguistic dancing around your family's identity makes even the most basic social interactions awkward and uncomfortable. You can't introduce yourself normally, can't engage in the casual conversations that other women take for granted, can't build the simple human connections that make life bearable. The isolation affects your relationship with your own extended family. Your parents, who arranged this marriage for economic security, now find themselves tainted by association. Your siblings discover that their marriage prospects have been damaged by their connection to Heinrich's profession. Family gatherings become tense affairs where everyone tries to act normal while carefully avoiding any mention of how you and Heinrich make your living. Your mother, who once took pride in her daughter's marriage to a man with steady employment, now makes excuses to avoid being seen with you in public. The medical implications of your social isolation become apparent when you fall ill with a fever that lasts for weeks. Other medieval wives would have a network of female neighbors to help with cooking, cleaning, and nursing care during illness. You have no such network. Heinrich does his best to care for you while maintaining his professional responsibilities, but he lacks the knowledge and experience that other women would bring to your sickbed. You recover slowly, weakened not just by illness, but by the realization that your social isolation has practical consequences that could literally be matters of life and death. Even the servants and laborers who might typically work for a household of your economic level are reluctant to enter the executioner's house. You find yourself doing work that other women of your social class would delegate to others: hauling water, scrubbing floors, washing clothes, tending the garden. The physical labor is exhausting, but it's also a constant reminder of your family's unique position outside the normal social hierarchy. You have the income to hire help, but not the social standing to attract workers who aren't desperate enough to overcome their superstitions and prejudices. The cumulative effect of this daily stigma begins to change your personality in ways you never expected. You become hyper-aware of other people's reactions, constantly analyzing facial expressions and body language for signs of disgust, fear, or rejection. You develop a defensive posture, preparing mentally for each social interaction as if it were a potential battle. The confident, optimistic young woman you were before your marriage gradually transforms into someone more guarded, more suspicious, more resigned to disappointment. You realize that the executioner's wife doesn't just live in social isolation. She learns to expect it, to plan for it, and eventually to prefer the safety of solitude over the constant risk of public humiliation. The anatomy of execution day. It's dawn on execution day, and you can feel the tension in the air before you even open your eyes. The entire town seems to hold its breath on these mornings, caught between morbid anticipation and moral unease. You've been married to Heinrich for almost a year now, and you've learned to recognize the subtle signs that mark these days as different from all others. There's a quality to the silence, a heaviness that settles over the house like a physical weight. You know that by sunset, someone will be dead, and your husband will be the instrument of that death. Heinrich rises earlier than usual on execution days, and his morning routine takes on an almost ritualistic quality. He spends extra time sharpening his tools, checking and double-checking every piece of equipment that he'll need. The axe must be perfectly balanced. The rope must be strong and properly knotted. The blocks and pulleys must move smoothly without squeaking or sticking. You watch him work with the same meticulous attention to detail that other craftsmen bring to their trades, except that Heinrich's craftsmanship will be measured not by the beauty of his creation, but by the efficiency and humanity of his destruction. You prepare Heinrich's breakfast with special care on execution days, knowing that he'll need sustained energy for the physical and emotional demands of his work. But the meal feels surreal. You're feeding your husband, so he'll have the strength to kill someone. The bread tastes the same as always, but somehow eating it feels different when you know its purpose. Heinrich eats methodically, quietly, already beginning the mental preparation that will allow him to perform his duties with professional competence rather than personal horror. The condemned prisoner has spent the night in the town jail, probably awake and terrified, contemplating the approaching end of their life. You can't help but wonder about this person, what they did to deserve death, whether they have family who will mourn them, whether they're truly guilty or merely convenient scapegoats for crimes that demand public retribution. Heinrich never tells you details about the condemned unless absolutely necessary, and you've learned not to ask. Knowing too much about the individuals whose lives he ends would make this existence unbearable. By mid-morning, the town square begins to fill with spectators. Executions are public entertainment in medieval society, drawing crowds that include everyone from respected merchants to common laborers, from curious children to elderly grandmothers. You watch from your window as people stake out the best viewing positions, bringing food and drink as if they're attending a festival. The casual, celebratory atmosphere surrounding state-sanctioned killing never stops disturbing you, but you've learned to accept it as another incomprehensible aspect of the world you now inhabit. Heinrich dresses carefully for public executions, not in his finest clothes, but in garments that project authority and competence. His appearance must reassure the crowd that justice will be carried out properly, efficiently, without unnecessary suffering or embarrassing mistakes. A botched execution reflects poorly on the entire local government. So Heinrich's professional reputation depends on maintaining an image of calm expertise, even when dealing with life and death situations. You help him prepare, checking that his clothes are clean and properly arranged, making sure he has everything he needs for the task ahead. The actual execution attracts a crowd that includes people from surrounding villages who have traveled specifically to witness the spectacle. Street vendors set up stalls selling food and drink, turning the town square into an impromptu marketplace where death is the main attraction. Children climb trees and sit on their father's shoulders to get better views of the scaffold. Women bring their sewing or knitting, planning to work on domestic tasks while watching a human being die. The normalcy of it all is perhaps the most disturbing aspect. How easily medieval society integrates public killing into the rhythm of ordinary life. You never attend the executions yourself. Part of this is practical. Your presence would draw attention and potentially complicate Heinrich's work. But mostly, you stay away because watching your husband kill people would add an unbearable psychological burden to an already difficult existence. Instead, you remain in the house, trying to focus on normal domestic tasks while being acutely aware that somewhere nearby, Heinrich is ending someone's life. You listen for the roar of the crowd that signals the moment of death, and you feel a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and guilt when that moment finally comes. The aftermath of an execution is almost as challenging as the event itself. Heinrich returns home physically and emotionally drained, covered in blood and carrying the psychic weight of what he's just done. He needs time to clean himself, to change clothes, to transition from his role as public executioner back to his private identity as your husband. You prepare hot water for washing, lay out clean clothes, and try to create an atmosphere of normal domestic life that can help him process what he's experienced. The house becomes a sanctuary where Heinrich can shed his professional identity and remember that he's more than just an instrument of death. The execution draws paying spectators from other towns, and local merchants benefit from the increased business that execution days bring. Innkeepers, food vendors, and craftsmen all see improved sales when public executions attract visitors to the area. You're darkly amused by the economic ecosystem that surrounds Heinrich's work. Your husband's professional competence doesn't just maintain law and order, it also stimulates the local economy. Death, in medieval society, is not just a moral and legal necessity. It's also a business opportunity that benefits the entire community. The evening after an execution is always quiet and subdued. The crowds have dispersed, the vendors have packed up their stalls, and the town square returns to its normal appearance except for the lingering blood stains on the scaffold. You and Heinrich eat dinner in relative silence, both of you processing the day's events in your own ways. He's professionally satisfied if the execution went smoothly, but he's also emotionally exhausted from the psychological demands of his work. You're relieved that it's over, but also aware that it will happen again, and again, and again, for as long as Heinrich remains the town executioner. Tomorrow will be a normal day, but eventually, another execution day will come, and you'll repeat this entire ritual of preparation, anticipation, and aftermath. When death comes home, it's been 14 months since your wedding, and tonight you're discovering that Heinrich's profession doesn't end when he leaves the town square. You're learning that being an executioner means that death follows him home, seeping into every corner of your domestic life like a persistent odor that no amount of scrubbing can eliminate. The tools of his trade live in your house. The knowledge of killing occupies his thoughts, and the psychological aftermath of ending human lives affects every interaction you have as a married couple. Heinrich keeps his professional equipment in a locked shed behind your house, but you're constantly aware of its presence. The axes, ropes, knives, and specialized tools that he uses for executions are stored just steps away from your kitchen garden and your chicken coop. Sometimes, late at night, you lie in bed listening to Heinrich check and maintain these instruments. The sound of metal against sharpening stone, creating a rhythm that other wives never have to hear. The tools themselves are well made and expensive. The town council spares no expense in ensuring that executions are carried out with professional-grade equipment, but their presence in your daily environment serves as a constant reminder of what Heinrich does for a living. The physical demands of Heinrich's job affect your marriage in ways you never anticipated. Executions are physically exhausting work, requiring strength, stamina, and precise coordination. When Heinrich comes home after a day that included an execution, he's not just emotionally drained. He's physically depleted in ways that affect his ability to be a present, engaged husband. His hands, which must be steady and strong enough to wield an axe or just a noose, sometimes shake from the adrenaline and stress of his work. His back aches from the physical positions required for different types of executions. His arms and shoulders bear the strain of repeatedly swinging heavy tools with deadly precision. You become an unofficial medical assistant, treating the minor injuries that Heinrich sustains in the course of his professional duties. A slip with a blade, a strain from handling heavy equipment, occasional bruises from struggling prisoners. These occupational hazards require immediate attention that no other medieval wife has to provide. You learn basic wound care, how to prepare poultices for strained muscles, which herbs help with pain and inflammation. Your medicine chest contains supplies that other households never need, and you develop medical knowledge that no woman should have to acquire through such circumstances. The psychological impact of Heinrich's work creates unique challenges in your marriage that no other medieval couple faces. He experiences what we might now recognize as symptoms of post-traumatic stress: difficulty sleeping, recurring nightmares, sudden mood changes, periods of emotional detachment. Medieval society has no understanding of psychological trauma, so Heinrich has no framework for understanding or addressing these symptoms. Instead, he turns to you for emotional support that you're not equipped to provide, creating a cycle of mutual stress and inadequacy that strains your relationship. Heinrich's professional knowledge of anatomy and the mechanics of death affects even your most intimate moments. He knows exactly how fragile human life is, precisely how easily a body can be damaged or destroyed, specifically what it looks like when life leaves a person's eyes. This knowledge colors his perception of everything, including his relationship with you. He's hyper-aware of your mortality in ways that other husbands never are, simultaneously protective and fatalistic about your well-being. His intimate knowledge of death makes him acutely conscious of how temporary and fragile your happiness together truly is. The timing of executions creates unpredictable disruptions to your household, routine that other medieval wives never have to manage. Executions are scheduled according to legal and political considerations that have nothing to do with your domestic needs. Heinrich might be called away to perform an execution during harvest time, on religious holidays, or during important family events. You learn to plan around this uncertainty, always keeping emergency supplies ready, always prepared to manage the household alone on short notice. Your life lacks the predictable rhythms that other medieval families take for granted. The social isolation that affects your family extends into your marriage itself, creating emotional distance between you and Heinrich that neither of you knows how to bridge. He can't share the details of his work without burdening you with disturbing images and moral complexities. You can't discuss your daily experiences of discrimination and rejection without adding to his psychological burden. Both of you learn to keep significant aspects of your lives private, even from each other, creating a marriage that's simultaneously intimate and eerily distant. Heinrich's professional reputation requires him to maintain emotional detachment during executions, but this learned detachment sometimes extends into your personal relationship. You find yourself living with a man who has trained himself to suppress empathy, to disconnect from human suffering, to view death as a technical problem rather than a human tragedy. These psychological defenses are necessary for his professional survival, but they make him a more distant, less emotionally available husband. You're married to someone who has learned to turn off his natural human responses to suffering and death, and sometimes that switch stays off even when he's home with you. The legal and political aspects of Heinrich's work create additional stress in your marriage. He's not just responsible for carrying out executions. He's also expected to participate in interrogations, torture sessions, and other judicial procedures that require his specialized knowledge of inflicting controlled physical damage without causing premature death. These additional duties mean that Heinrich's involvement with violence and suffering extends far beyond the public executions that everyone knows about. It carries the psychological burden of participating in the entire judicial process, from initial questioning through final punishment. The seasonal nature of Heinrich's work creates periods of intense stress, followed by intervals of relative calm, but even the calm periods are colored by anticipation of future violence. During quiet months when no executions are scheduled, you both try to enjoy normal domestic life, but you're always aware that this peace is temporary. Heinrich uses these breaks to maintain his equipment, review his techniques, and prepare mentally for the next execution. You use them to replenish your emotional reserves and strengthen your relationship enough to survive the next period of professional stress. Your marriage exists in a constant cycle of preparation, endurance, and recovery that other medieval couples never have to navigate. The currency of fear 18 months into your marriage. You've discovered that being the executioner's wife means living as legal tender in an economy of terror. Your very existence serves a purpose in medieval society's complex system of social control. You're a walking reminder that justice has teeth, that transgressions have consequences, that the comfortable distance between law-abiding citizens and violent death is maintained by people like your husband. Every time someone sees you at the market or in church, they're reminded that execution isn't just an abstract concept, but a concrete reality carried out by real people living in their community. The town authorities understand that Heinrich's effectiveness as an executioner depends partly on his visibility as a member of the community. An executioner who lived in complete isolation would become a mysterious, almost mythical figure whose deterrent effect would be diminished by his absence from daily life. But an executioner whose wife shops at the same market, attends the same church, and lives on the same streets as potential criminals, now that's a deterrent with immediate, tangible reality. Your presence in public spaces serves as a constant, subtle reminder that the machinery of justice is always nearby, always ready, always operated by people who live among the community they serve. You become unwittingly complicit in this psychological system of deterrence through your simple daily activities. When you buy bread from the same baker who might someday witness your husband's work, when you pray in the same church where condemned prisoners receive their last rites, when you walk past the town square where the execution scaffold stands as a permanent fixture, you're participating in a complex drama of power and fear that keeps medieval society functioning. Your visibility normalizes the presence of institutional violence while simultaneously making it more immediate and threatening. The local magistrates and town council members treat you with a mixture of respect and wariness that reflects their complicated relationship with Heinrich's profession. They need your husband's services to maintain their authority, but they're also uncomfortable with the moral implications of employing someone whose job is killing people. You find yourself in awkward social situations where these officials must acknowledge your family's importance to civic order while maintaining appropriate moral distance from the violence that Heinrich carries out on their behalf. They invite you to certain civic functions because excluding the executioner's family would suggest shame about necessary governmental functions, but they also ensure that your interactions remain formal and limited. Your presence at public events serves multiple social functions that you're only beginning to understand. When you attend religious festivals, market days, or civic celebrations, you're demonstrating that the executioner's family is integrated into community life rather than completely ostracized. This integration is important for maintaining the legitimacy of executions. If Heinrich were completely outside society, his actions might seem like private vengeance rather than public justice. Your attendance at normal social events helps maintain the fiction that executions are civilized, lawful procedures rather than barbaric acts of violence. The children in your community receive informal education about justice and consequences. Simply by observing how adults interact with your family, they learn that some people in society have roles that require them to do terrible but necessary things. That authority sometimes manifests through violence. That social order depends on the willingness of certain individuals to carry out acts that everyone else prefers to avoid. Your presence in their daily environment teaches them lessons about power, morality, and social hierarchy that no formal education could provide. They learn to fear authority not abstractly, but through concrete observation of how authority affects real people in their immediate community. You notice how your presence affects crowd behavior during public gatherings and celebrations. People give you slightly more space than they give others, speak more quietly when you're nearby, and generally behave with greater restraint and formality. Your very presence seems to activate people's awareness of social rules and boundaries, reminding them that certain behaviors have serious consequences. You've become a human embodiment of the social contract, living proof that civilized society depends on the willingness of some people to enforce its rules through violence when necessary. The economic relationships in your community are subtly influenced by your family's role in the justice system. Merchants who might be tempted to cheat customers, landlords who might consider illegal evictions, employers who might withhold wages, all of these potential transgressors are reminded of the consequences of their actions by your routine presence in their daily environment. Your husband's professional reputation for efficiency and competence makes these reminders particularly effective. Nobody wants to risk facing an executioner who takes pride in his work and has never botched an execution. The timing of your public appearances becomes strategically important in ways you never anticipated. When crime rates are high or when tensions are building in the community, your increased visibility serves as a subtle but effective reminder of the authorities' capacity for decisive action. During political conflicts or social unrest, your family's continued presence in the community demonstrates that the justice system remains functional and ready to respond to challenges to public order. You become an unwitting participant in the theater of power that medieval governments used to maintain control over their populations. Your role in this system of social control extends to private interactions and relationships, as well as public appearances. When neighbors argue over property lines, when merchants dispute contract terms, when family conflicts threaten to become violent, your presence in these situations often has a calming effect that helps prevent minor disputes from escalating into serious crimes. People modify their behavior when they remember that the consequences of criminal activity are immediate and certain rather than distant and theoretical. Your husband's professional competence makes those consequences particularly vivid and memorable. The psychological burden of serving as a deterrent affects your own behavior and self-perception in ways that you struggle to understand. You find yourself hyper-aware of how your actions might be interpreted, constantly conscious that your behavior reflects not just on your family, but on the entire justice system that your husband represents. This awareness makes you more cautious, more formal, more restrained than you might naturally be. You're not just living your own life. You're performing a social role that serves the broader community's need for order and predictability. The weight of this responsibility adds another layer of stress to an already challenging existence as the executioner's wife. The sounds of suffering. 2 years into your marriage, you've learned that Heinrich's profession has trained your ears to recognize sounds that other medieval wives never hear. Or rather, sounds they hear but don't understand with the terrible specificity that has become second nature to you. You know the difference between a scream of pain and a scream of mortal terror. You can distinguish the particular quality of a voice that belongs to someone who knows they're about to die. You understand the acoustic signatures of different types of physical suffering, and this knowledge haunts your daily life in ways that would be incomprehensible to women whose husbands work in normal professions. The town jail is located close enough to your house that sounds carry from the cells to your kitchen window on quiet nights. Medieval interrogation techniques are designed to extract confessions, and the methods used often involve controlled applications of physical pain that don't quite qualify as torture, but certainly transcend simple questioning. Heinrich is sometimes called to participate in these sessions, lending his professional expertise about the human body's tolerance for pain and his practical knowledge of techniques that produce maximum psychological impact with minimal risk of premature death. When he returns from these sessions, he brings with him the psychic residue of suffering that you can almost smell on his clothes. You've developed an involuntary ability to analyze the sounds that emerge from Heinrich's professional activities, and this skill extends far beyond his official duties as an executioner. When arguments break out in the town square, when accidents happen in neighboring workshops, when children cry after injuries, you find yourself automatically assessing the severity of situations based on acoustic evidence that other people don't even consciously notice. Your ear has been trained by necessity to recognize the difference between pain that will heal and pain that indicates permanent damage or approaching death. The public executions that Heinrich performs create distinctive soundscapes that become as familiar to you as household noises are to other medieval wives. You know the particular quality of crowd noise that builds before an execution, anticipation mixed with moral discomfort, excitement tempered by religious unease. You can identify the moment when the crowd's mood shifts from anticipation to satisfaction. The collective intake of breath that occurs when the condemned prisoner appears on the scaffold. The sudden silence that falls when Heinrich raises his axe or tightens the noose around someone's neck. The aftermath of executions produces its own characteristic sounds that follow Heinrich home and linger in your domestic environment. The particular way he breathes after killing someone, deeper than normal, with longer pauses between breaths, as if he's consciously reminding himself that he's still alive while someone else is not. The way he moves around the house with slightly heavier footsteps, the unconscious sounds he makes while cleaning blood from his clothes and tools. The quality of silence that settles over your household after death has been dispensed in the town square. You've learned to interpret Heinrich's nocturnal sounds as indicators of his psychological state and professional stress levels. Some nights he sleeps quietly, exhausted but at peace with his work. Other nights he tosses and turns, muttering unintelligibly or calling out names that you assume belong to people he's executed. The most disturbing nights are when he makes no sound at all, lying rigid and motionless beside you, wide awake but pretending to sleep, processing experiences that he can't share even with his wife. These silent nights worry you more than the restless ones, because they suggest a level of psychological isolation that words could never bridge. The seasonal rhythms of Heinrich's work create corresponding patterns in the household soundscape that you've learned to anticipate and interpret. Spring and summer bring more frequent executions, which means more nights of disturbed sleep, more evenings of heavy silence, more mornings when Heinrich moves through his routines with the deliberate precision of someone who's steeling himself for another day of ending human lives. Winter and autumn are quieter, but this quiet has its own quality. Not peaceful silence, but the tense stillness of someone waiting for violence to resume. Your neighbor's reactions to your family create another layer of acoustic information that you've learned to read with uncomfortable accuracy. You know the sound of conversations that stop abruptly when you approach, the particular quality of whispers that follows you through the market, the way children's laughter dies when their parents notice you nearby. These sounds of social rejection have become as familiar to you as your own heartbeat and equally impossible to ignore. You've developed a hypersensitivity to the subtle acoustic markers of fear, disgust, and moral judgment that other people direct toward your family. The religious implications of Heinrich's work manifest themselves through sounds that other medieval wives experience differently. Church bells that ring for executions have a different emotional resonance when your husband is the one carrying out the sentence. Prayers for the condemned take on personal meaning when you know that your family's livelihood depends on their deaths. The priest's sermons about justice and mercy sound different when you're married to the person who embodies the violent aspects of divine justice that everyone prefers to think about abstractly rather than concretely. Heinrich's professional tools create their own distinctive sounds that punctuate your daily life with reminders of his work. The methodical scraping of whetstones against metal as he sharpens his axes and knives. The creak of rope as he tests knots and checks the integrity of his equipment. The dull thud of axe blades striking wooden practice blocks as he maintains his precision and timing. These sounds of professional preparation blend with normal household noises, cooking, cleaning, maintaining the fire, creating a domestic soundscape that would be utterly alien to other medieval families. The cumulative effect of living within these soundscapes of suffering and death begins to change your own. relationship with noise and silence. You find yourself speaking more quietly than you used to, as if loud voices might somehow wake the dead or attract unwanted attention from supernatural forces. You become more sensitive to sudden noises, more startled by unexpected sounds, more attuned to the emotional undertones in other people's voices. Your ears, trained by necessity to interpret the acoustic signatures of violence and suffering, can no longer experience simple domestic sounds with the innocent enjoyment that other wives take for granted. Even the most peaceful moments in your household carry underlying reminders of Heinrich's profession, creating a life where true silence, silence unmarked by the memory of screams, becomes impossible to achieve. The children who never come. 3 years into your marriage, the absence of children has become a presence unto itself, filling your house with unspoken questions and unfulfilled expectations that weigh heavier with each passing month. Other medieval wives your age are managing households full of small children, but your womb remains empty, and you can't help wondering whether this is divine judgment, biological misfortune, or perhaps an unconscious mercy that spares potential children from inheriting the stigma of their father's profession. The silence where children's laughter should be echoes through your daily routines, making every domestic task feel incomplete and purposeless. Medieval society places enormous pressure on women to produce children, particularly sons who can carry on their father's trade and support their parents in old age. But Heinrich's profession complicates this expectation in ways that other couples never have to consider. What kind of future would you be providing for a child born into the executioner's family? Would a son be expected to follow his father into this grim profession, perpetuating a cycle of social isolation and moral compromise? Would a daughter ever find a husband willing to accept the executioner's granddaughter as a wife? These questions torment you during the long hours you spend alone while Heinrich fulfills his professional duties. The practical aspects of raising children in the executioner's household would present unique challenges that other medieval mothers never face. How would you explain to a curious child why their father comes home covered in blood? How would you help them understand why other children aren't allowed to play with them? How would you prepare them for a life of social isolation and moral complexity that they didn't choose but would inherit simply by being born? The thought of having to answer these questions fills you with a dread that's almost as powerful as your longing for motherhood. You've consulted with local healers and midwives about your apparent infertility, but their treatments and advice feel inadequate given the unique circumstances of your marriage. They prescribe herbs and dietary changes, recommend prayers and pilgrimages, suggest modifications to your daily routines that might encourage conception. But none of them address the possibility that the psychological stress of your situation might be affecting your body's ability to conceive and carry a child. Medieval medicine has no understanding of how emotional trauma and chronic stress can interfere with reproductive function. The financial implications of Heinrich's profession create additional anxiety about potential children. While executioners typically earn more than many other medieval tradesmen, the income is unpredictable and entirely dependent on the local crime rate and political stability. What would happen to your family if Heinrich became unable to work? Other medieval fathers can teach their trades to their sons, creating economic continuity across generations. But Heinrich's profession isn't something that can be easily passed down or transferred. The skills are too specialized, the social consequences too severe, the moral burden too heavy to impose on a child who might have other options. You watch other women in your community as they navigate pregnancy, childbirth, and early motherhood, and you feel excluded not just from their experiences, but from their entire social network. Medieval women rely heavily on each other for support during pregnancy and childbirth, sharing knowledge, resources, and practical assistance. But your social isolation means that you would have to face these experiences largely alone, without the community of women that makes motherhood manageable for others. The thought of giving birth without proper support of raising children without the informal networks of advice and assistance that other mothers rely on adds another layer of anxiety to your already complicated relationship with potential motherhood. Heinrich's reaction to your childlessness is complex and painful to witness. He wants children as much as you do, but he's also acutely aware of the challenges that his profession would create for any child of his. Sometimes you catch him watching other men with their sons, and you can see the longing in his expression, mixed with relief that he won't have to explain his work to innocent young minds. He speaks occasionally about the possibility of finding a different profession if you were to conceive. But you both know that executioners rarely have opportunities to transition into other types of work. The skills don't transfer, and the social stigma would follow him regardless of career changes. The religious implications of your childlessness add another dimension to your psychological burden. Medieval Christianity teaches that children are divine blessings, but it also suggests that barrenness can be divine punishment for sin. You find yourself wondering whether God is withholding children from your marriage because Heinrich's profession violates some fundamental moral principle. The priest offers vague reassurances about God's mysterious ways, but he can't provide the specific guidance you need about whether it's morally acceptable to bring children into a family whose livelihood depends on ending human lives. The seasonal cycles that mark other women's lives through pregnancy and childbirth pass by you unchanged, creating a sense of temporal stagnation that makes your existence feel increasingly unmoored from normal human experience. You watch the same women give birth year after year, see their children grow and develop, witness the natural progression of family life that seems to be permanently beyond your reach. Your marriage exists in a kind of suspended animation where the future looks exactly like the present, unchanging and increasingly hopeless. The practical preparations that other medieval wives make for potential children feel pointless in your situation. You've prepared baby clothes and cradles that remain unused, gathered supplies for childbirth that seem increasingly unnecessary, learned skills for child rearing that you may never have occasion to practice. These unused preparations become painful reminders of hopes that may never be fulfilled, dreams that may be permanently incompatible with the reality of Heinrich's profession. The possibility that your childlessness might be a blessing in disguise becomes more apparent as you observe how Heinrich's work affects even your adult relationship. If the psychological burden of his profession is difficult for two mature adults to manage, how much more challenging would it be to protect innocent children from its effects? Perhaps your empty womb is protecting potential children from inheriting a legacy of violence, isolation, and moral complexity that no child should have to bear. This thought provides some comfort, but it also raises disturbing questions about the fundamental compatibility of Heinrich's profession with normal family life and human happiness. The price of efficiency 4 years into your marriage. You've come to understand that Heinrich's reputation for professional competence comes with costs that extend far beyond the obvious moral burdens of his work. Medieval society demands that executions be carried out quickly, cleanly, and without embarrassing mistakes that might undermine public confidence in the justice system. This means that Heinrich must maintain his skills at a level of precision that would be impressive in any other profession, but becomes deeply disturbing when applied to the business of ending human lives. You watch your husband practice his deadly craft with the same dedication that other men bring to woodworking or metallsmithing, and the normalcy of his professional diligence makes the horror of his work even more unsettling. Heinrich spends hours each week maintaining his equipment with an attention to detail that borders on obsessive. Medieval execution tools must be kept in perfect condition because a dull axe or frayed rope can turn a quick, relatively merciful death into a prolonged, agonizing spectacle that traumatizes spectators and damages the executioner's reputation. You watch him test the sharpness of his blades by shaving thin curls of wood, adjust the balance of his axes by adding or removing small amounts of weight, examine every inch of rope for signs of wear or weakness. This meticulous attention to his tools is essential for professional competence, but it also means that your household is filled with perfectly maintained instruments of death. The physical demands of Heinrich's profession require him to maintain his body with the same systematic approach that he applies to his equipment. Executioners need specific types of strength and coordination that must be developed and maintained through regular practice. Heinrich spends time each day working with weighted objects to build the precise muscle memory required for clean, efficient executions. He practices his swings with wooden logs, adjusts his stance and timing, works on the breathing techniques that help him remain calm and focused during high-pressure situations. Watching your husband train to kill people more effectively is profoundly disturbing, even when you understand the practical necessity of his preparations. The psychological preparation that Heinrich undergoes before each execution has become a ritual that affects your entire household routine. He enters a state of focused detachment that allows him to perform his duties without being overwhelmed by their moral and emotional implications. This mental discipline is essential for professional effectiveness, but it also creates periods when Heinrich becomes emotionally unavailable to you. He withdraws into himself, speaking less, avoiding eye contact, preparing mentally for the act of ending someone's life. These periods of emotional distance are necessary for his psychological survival, but they're also painful reminders of how his profession interferes with normal human relationships. Heinrich's professional reputation depends on public perception of his competence and reliability, which means that every execution becomes a performance that will be evaluated and discussed throughout the community. A successful execution enhances his reputation and job security. A botched execution could lead to his dismissal or worse. This pressure for consistent professional excellence affects every aspect of his preparation and creates stress levels that other medieval tradesmen never experience. The stakes of Heinrich's work aren't just economic. They're literally matters of life and death, both for the condemned prisoners and for Heinrich's own future prospects. The knowledge that Heinrich must acquire to perform his job effectively includes detailed understanding of human anatomy, pain tolerance, and the mechanics of death that would be considered specialized medical knowledge in any other context. He knows exactly where to place a rope to ensure quick unconsciousness, precisely how much force is required to sever a neck cleanly, specifically which angles and techniques produce the fastest, most humane results. This knowledge makes him more effective at his job, but it also means that he possesses intimate familiarity with human vulnerability and mortality that colors every aspect of his worldview. The timing and scheduling of executions create unpredictable demands on Heinrich's time, energy that affect your entire household routine. Unlike other medieval professions that follow seasonal patterns or market schedules, executions are scheduled according to legal and political considerations that have nothing to do with Heinrich's personal convenience or professional preferences. He might be called to perform an execution with very little notice, requiring him to drop other activities and shift immediately into his professional mindset. This unpredictability makes it difficult to plan normal domestic activities or maintain consistent household routines. Heinrich's professional efficiency has earned him recognition from regional authorities who sometimes request his services for particularly important or challenging executions. While this recognition brings additional income and professional prestige, it also means longer periods away from home and exposure to more complex political situations. When Heinrich travels to other towns to perform executions, you're left alone to manage the household while worrying about his safety and wondering about the specific circumstances that required his specialized expertise. These professional opportunities expand Heinrich's career prospects while simultaneously increasing the stress and isolation that you experience as his wife. The community's perception of Heinrich's professional competence creates a complex dynamic where people simultaneously respect his skills and fear his capabilities. His reputation for quick, clean executions is reassuring to those who support capital punishment. But it's also deeply unsettling to anyone who contemplates the precision and expertise required to end human lives efficiently. You notice how people react differently to Heinrich, depending on whether they're thinking of him as a skilled tradesman or as someone who kills people for a living. This duality in public perception affects how you're treated as well, sometimes with professional respect and sometimes with moral horror. The long-term implications of Heinrich's professional efficiency raise questions about your future together that become more pressing with each passing year. His reputation and skills are valuable now, but what will happen as he ages and his physical capabilities decline? Other medieval craftsmen can continue working with reduced strength or slower reflexes, but an executioner who can't perform his duties effectively becomes a liability to the justice system that employs him. The thought of Heinrich's eventual retirement or inability to work creates anxiety about your financial security and raises disturbing questions about whether his specialized knowledge and skills have any application outside his current profession. The final reckoning. 5 years have passed since you became the executioner's wife. And tonight, as you sit by the window watching Heinrich sharpen his tools for tomorrow's execution, you realize that this life has fundamentally changed. Who you are in ways that would have been unimaginable to the young woman who walked down the aisle that autumn morning so long ago. You've survived half a decade of social isolation, moral complexity, and daily confrontation with humanity's capacity for both justice and cruelty. You've learned to find love and meaning within circumstances that would have destroyed other marriages, other people, other dreams of normal happiness. The woman you've become is harder than the girl you were, but also more compassionate in unexpected ways. Living so close to death has taught you to value life with an intensity that other people rarely achieve. Every moment of happiness feels precious because you know how easily it can be taken away. Every simple pleasure, a warm meal, a sunny afternoon, a peaceful night's sleep, carries special significance because you understand. How many people have been permanently separated from such ordinary joys? Your proximity to endings has made you more grateful for beginnings, more aware of the fragile miracle that consciousness represents in a universe that seems largely indifferent to human suffering. You've developed a relationship with morality that's more nuanced than the simple good and evil distinctions that most medieval people accept without question. Living with Heinrich has forced you to confront the reality that good people sometimes have to do terrible things, that justice sometimes requires cruelty, that social order depends on individuals who are willing to bear moral burdens that others cannot or will not carry. You've learned that ethical purity is a luxury that society can afford only because some people are willing to sacrifice their own moral cleanliness for the greater good. The social isolation that once felt like punishment has gradually transformed into a form of freedom that other medieval women never experience. You're not bound by the same social expectations and restrictions that constrain other wives, because you're already outside normal society's boundaries. This outsider status has given you perspectives on medieval life that insiders never develop. You see the hypocrisies, contradictions, and arbitrary cruelties that maintain social order because you're not invested in pretending they don't exist. Your exclusion from normal social networks has forced you to develop inner resources and independence that other women never need to cultivate. Heinrich has changed too, shaped by years of carrying out society's ultimate punishment while trying to maintain his humanity and his marriage. He's learned to compartmentalize his professional identity in ways that allow him to be a loving husband despite being a professional killer. The man who ends lives for a living has also become someone who values life more deeply than most people ever do. His intimate knowledge of death has made him more appreciative of every day he spends alive. Every conversation he shares with you, every moment of peace he can find away from his professional responsibilities. Your marriage has survived challenges that would have destroyed most relationships, and in some ways, it's stronger because of what you've endured together. You and Heinrich have seen each other at your worst, him returning home covered in blood and emotionally shattered. You consumed by anger and resentment at the circumstances you never chose. But you've also discovered that love can exist in the darkest places, that intimacy can develop even when normal social connections are impossible. The two people can create meaning and happiness, even in situations that seem designed to destroy both. The childlessness that once felt like a tragic loss now seems like a form of mercy that spared potential children from inheriting the complex legacy of Heinrich's profession. You've come to understand that some forms of love express themselves through protection rather than creation, through ensuring that certain burdens don't pass to the next generation rather than through biological continuation. Your marriage has become complete in ways that don't require children to validate its worth or purpose. The financial security that Heinrich's profession provides has allowed you to develop interests and skills that other medieval women never have the opportunity to pursue. The social isolation that keeps you away from normal female networks has also freed you from their limitations and expectations. You've learned to read, to manage complex household finances, to understand legal and political concepts that most women never encounter. Your unusual circumstances have provided you with an education that would have been impossible in a conventional medieval marriage. The understanding of justice and mercy that you've developed through your relationship with Heinrich's work has given you insights into human nature that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. You've learned that evil is often mundane rather than dramatic, that good people are capable of terrible acts when circumstances demand them, that moral judgments are more complex than they appear from a comfortable distance. This knowledge is painful, but it's also valuable in ways that simple moral certainty could never be. Looking toward the future, you realize that your life will probably never be normal in the ways that other people understand normality. Heinrich will continue as the town executioner until age or infirmity forces his retirement, and you will continue as his wife, his partner in this strange profession that serves society's needs while isolating those who perform its duties. But you've also learned that happiness doesn't require normality, that love doesn't need social approval to be real and sustaining. That meaning can be found in the most unlikely circumstances. As Heinrich finishes his preparations for tomorrow's execution and prepares for bed, you realize that you've become someone you never expected to be. Someone who can find peace with moral complexity, who can love a man whose profession involves ending lives, who can build a meaningful existence on the margins of medieval society. The executioner's wife you've become is not the woman you thought you'd be, but she's someone who has learned to find grace in the most graceless circumstances, love in the most unlovable situations, and hope in places where hope seems impossible. Tomorrow will bring another execution, another test of Heinrich's professional competence and your emotional resilience. But tonight, in the safety of your shared solitude, you've found a form of happiness that exists nowhere else in the medieval world. The deep, quiet satisfaction of two people who have learned to create light in the darkest possible place.